Hello, everyone, and a very warm-hearted welcome. Actually, want to see if I can manage this technology just so that you get to see my face here at the beginning. That's me, the one flapping my lips talking. A very, very warm welcome to this webinar experience in video and visual and audio on stopping human trafficking with humor. You can imagine when I was flying to Phoenix to give the keynote of this title to the Applied and Therapeutic Humor Conference, and we definitely want to give a nod at this moment to the Association of Applied and Therapeutic Humor. You can look them up online. What an extraordinary group of individuals who are bringing humor into hospitals and therapeutic settings as a therapeutic intervention. And they invited me, my name is Sheva Kar, to speak there about the work I'm doing with many others to end human trafficking with humor. And when I said that to the people on my Southwest flight sitting next to me, they looked at me like I had about 8 heads and were like, well, good luck with that. And Southwest, one of those airlines where you choose your own seating, so they got up and went somewhere else. Who tries to end human trafficking with humor? Come on. That's a little out there. So welcome to Out Here, where we end human trafficking with humor, or at least we're working toward that mission. I'm bringing a light heart to this, to a very heavy, concerning circumstance, a circumstance that Jimmy Carter called the most tragic human rights violation in the history of humanity. So, humor, when it's not cynical or judgmental or cruel, is always transformational in some way or another. And yet when we marry humor with sobriety and bring it to the most devastating conditions of our time, its power of transformation in juxtaposition to the contrasting circumstance can be that much more powerful. So while this indeed, and I do have a little joke from my Baltic friends to share with you here, as I share my screen again. Time to flush the Johns out of the Baltic. That was their poster after they criminalized the buying of sex. So while we are bringing humor to this devastating issue, we do, or at least I feel I would be doing you a disservice if I didn't at least introduce those of you who are relatively unfamiliar with the human trafficking issue to some context of what we're talking about. And being a filmmaker, among other things, I love to let film tell stories that are difficult to tell. So I'm going to start, maybe some of you, especially Melinda, I know that you're here. Maybe you can text me so we can confirm in the midst of this Mercury retrograde that our technology is working. Maybe you can text me that the film is showing. I'm going to show you a film clip shot by some very dear friends of mine who just presented at the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women on a panel discussion I organized about human trafficking. And the panel included this trailer to a film called Playground, shot by Libby and Nishima Chudasama, Libby Spears and Nishima Chudasama of the Nest Foundation. And I'm going to let the clip speak for itself.
I got started when I was 13. I was really young, and the people that bought me were people that were looking for, child fetishes. There was like 15 of them in a room, and I was really scared. He cut me with a knife to be able to penetrate me, and I was only 5. I was crying because I was scared, and he had sex with me, and that was my first time. I still had on my school uniform. Men who come here to abuse children in Cambodia have 99.9% of the time already abused children in their own country. White girl, white short that we're all taking hits on. She's like scared out of her mind. She's like kind of young. Like she's afraid to actually go through with it. All right, Brian, we got her. We as a nation are going to have to sit back, take a deep breath, and realize, oh my God, this is in our neighborhoods, in our families, in our communities. It's right under our noses. We frequently see drugs and psychological brainwashing become part of the process of keeping them committed to the offender.
Men will actually fly into Atlanta, get on the internet, say, I want a boy who has no hair on his head, no hair anywhere, I want him to look like he's 13, I want him to be no taller than 5'2", moderate, show up here, have sex, and be gone.
See, touched, what and smile. The sexual exploitation of children has become a cottage industry, driven by the internet. It's very difficult for us to define the problem of child pornography to the American public because it's something we obviously can't show them.
There are some of the acts that I couldn't even describe to you, against children so young that no normal person could look at that without being disturbed.
It ain't about sex. It just be about business. That's it. Once you get them to go the first time, then you got a better chance of getting them to keep going.
I was really nervous and I was really scared. And he was holding his gun and shot me. You cannot arrest 11, 12, and 13-year-olds and charge them with prostitution. You cannot criminalize children. I think people view the prostitution like a victimless crime. Most of the girls that we come across nowadays are 13, 14, 15 years old. I know these girls didn't wake up one morning and say, I want to be a prostitute today. There are millions and millions of photos of children who are being sexually abused. Nobody knows who these children are. And it raises the question to us, are there that many pedophiles out there? Or is something else happening?
So there is a reason that I chose to show you Playground. It's a little hard to take at any time of day, especially at first thing in the morning. Difficult to wake up to this reality going on, not only in our world, but for those of us in the United States, most especially in our country. And one of the myths about human trafficking is that people in the United States tend to have the misperception that it's something happening going on over there, somewhere else. It is unfortunately happening over there somewhere else, and it's also happening here. As a member of the California FBI said to me at the UN, if you have a motel in your neighborhood, you have human trafficking in your neighborhood. This problem is so pervasive and exists in every society, everywhere, that it's hard for the mind to conceive. And that's one of the reasons that we need humor, because it is, I would venture to say, such an intractable problem that we cannot resolve it, as Einstein would say, from the level of thinking in our society that has created it. We will have to find a different kind of intelligence, which I will suggest, based on my work with the HeartMath Institute for the last 20 years, is going to come from the heart. And humor, as you will see, may help us get there. So I did not, well, we should give some sense of scope. I chose that clip to help Americans in particular recognize this is not an over there problem. This is in your backyard, maybe next door to you. And therefore, it is our responsibility to stop it. And the United Nations has now put out some literature showing that the trafficking of human beings, which includes labor trafficking as well as sex trafficking, although 80% of human trafficking is in the sex trade, and a huge percentage of that affects women and girl children, but also boy children. About 30% of trafficked children into the sex trade are boys. So it is not just a gender-specific issue. Perpetrators come from both genders, though the vast majority are men. And it has surpassed the drugs trade and the arms trade as the single largest illicit industry in the world. Billions of dollars a year are exchanged for the buying and selling of sex using human slaves. And really, how can the mind even digest that? I personally have a hard time with it myself. I did not get involved in this on purpose. I guess it is very on purpose at one level, but I wasn't expecting to get involved in the fight to end human trafficking. What happened is, through my work with HeartMath, a research institute that discovered peace is not just a subjective experience, nor is it just fighting war. Peace is actually a measurable, quantifiable, physiological shift in the human heart rhythm that we can learn to activate and train to do at will. And through that journey, I got involved with a United Nations Peace Messenger organization called Pathways to Peace. They were influential in starting the International Day of Peace with the United Nations in 1983. And I became co-vice president of this organization and was sent to the UN as a peace delegate, representing also a group of HeartMath students and personal development students that are a part of my Heart Ambassador program. So we traveled to the United Nations as Peace and Heart Ambassadors, thinking that we were going to teach conflict resolution and our physiological peace as hope for the planet, to end war, to the UN staff and others. And what happened, instead of being a teacher there, is I became a very humble student. And I received a powerful education that more women die due to gender-based violence than all of the people in all of the world's wars combined. I'm going to say it again because it's such a powerful fact. More women die in the world due to gender-based violence, violence because they are women or girls, than all of the soldiers in all of the world's wars combined. And so I learned at the United Nations that we cannot be peace messengers. We cannot bring peace on earth without addressing gender-based violence. And I learned we cannot address gender-based violence without addressing human trafficking. And so this began my first 10-day visit to the UN, a trip down this sober, devastating path. I'm hoping you can stay with me because we get to the upside of this in a minute. I'm hopefully shortcutting your trip into the dark void. Mine lasted 10 days at the UN, where I attended panel discussion after panel discussion with the facts and the figures and traffic survivors telling their horror stories. And by the end, I was really unable to even apply my own stress management tools. I couldn't find peace with any of this. I was horrified. And on my last day at the UN, you know, these UN conferences, you get these catalogs of hundreds and hundreds of panels and presentations you can attend. And I had circled one for my last presentation in the little catalog, and I was sitting in the presentation before it in a stupor. I could not pull myself up off the bench. I just sat there. I was like, I can't even go to the last presentation. I couldn't move. And what a grace that was, that stillness that day, because I ended up by default watching the panel that walked in to the room where I couldn't move. And into that room walked this woman, Gudrun Johnstadter. Now, it bears mentioning, before I introduce you fully to Gudrun, that clearly this is no laughing matter. So why are we talking about it at a humor conference? And part of it is that, as you can imagine, secondary trauma, vicarious trauma, burnout is rampant in the field of stopping human trafficking, rehabilitating traffic victims and traffickers, because this issue is so widespread and so horrifically abusive and devastating. You've only seen the very tip of a terrible iceberg. We can, as workers in this field, become mired in the undertow of negativity and hopelessness and despair. And that doesn't help us be effective at doing this. And to give you a picture of what this is like at the UN, we can be there sometimes in these discussions at the United Nations without smiling for 10 days straight. And things get heavier and heavier and heavier. So you can catch now the little smirk in this woman's face, Gudrun Johnstadter of Iceland. She was on the official Icelandic delegation. And I want you to imagine, I'm going to play another video clip for you now. I want you to imagine that this video clip comes at the end of a very long commission on the status of women, where you'll see in the faces, no one's been smiling. And this video clip comes right after one of the delegates to the UN has stood up and said, we have to educate women and girls to protect them from being vulnerable to this scourge. And here is Gudrun's response. And you'll get to meet her the way I met her.
Here we will hear speaks about educating girls. So much hurts when I do this. I'm sorry to say. We have been trying to prevent the work the very wrong way. We always talk about women. We talk to women about escaping and taking care of themselves. That will not change anything. Stop it. Make the ones responsible that have the responsibility. We need to educate boys and men. Yes. They are the victims. They are amongst them. We have to enable them. We have to do preventive work, focusing on examples. And we can do it in many ways. My sister talked about having been raped and what can be done. There's a lot that needs to be done. Education has to train the whole system of justice, the public. We have to, very simple, symbolic way, are those few boxes that we made it seeable. Saying the five
That was the first time we saw any smiles. I am responsible underwear. There we go. And now the chief of police in Iceland wears them outside his police uniform. But that was not always the case. And my apologies, by the way, if you needed to take Dramamine during that video. We're technically not supposed to film on the UN grounds. So that was a little rogue moment with my iPhone camera. I had to kind of dart to and fro. But I knew I would want to share that moment with all of you. Because by that time I knew Gudrun, and I didn't know what she was up to, but I knew it was going to be good. The first time I met Gudrun, I heard the story of the police chief before he was willing to wear I am responsible underwear, and I'm going to share that with you now in a moment. But first I want to show you one other video clip that the Icelandic government created in concert with women on the United Nations delegation from Iceland in response to that call to action in a funny way to educate boys. So here's what my friend Thordís from Iceland was hired to create for sex ed for boys and girls, but also really to target boys. And this is from a video from Iceland they show in the high schools called Get Consent.
Hver þú? Og hvað ertu með það? Bara, þú veist, tyggjó. Kynlíf getur verið frekar vandræðalegt.
So one of the difficult things about having you guys on mute is that we can't hear everyone laughing. But when I had the privilege of presenting this material at the Applied and Therapeutic Humor Conference, needless to say, there was a lot of laughter on that video. And so what's happening is the Icelandic women and men are using humor to have a very powerful conversation about these things that are difficult to talk about, and especially with teenagers. So they used humor to reach teens to have a discussion about consensual sex and what that means. And so I now am going to share with you the story of Operation Big Sister, which is really their initiative to end human trafficking, and how humor has played a very important part in that. So I'm going to just take it off screen share for a moment so that I can see all of you. How's everybody doing? Thumbs up if you're A-okay. Raise your hand if you have a question at this point and I can unmute you. No questions? Everybody's good? So the police chief of Iceland did not always wear "I am responsible" underwear. Iceland, like every other part of the world, was devastated by human trafficking. And for 10 years, Gudrun and some of her other Icelandic sisters from the delegation to the Commission on the Status of Women and others fought to pass legislation in Iceland that would end human trafficking. Now, at this point, I'll give you a very brief and simple education on the laws related to prostitution and human trafficking, which some consider to not be the same thing. We have to say that. And there's arguments on the world stage about that. And we're not going to talk about that today, except to say that in Norway and Sweden, they passed a very innovative law. You see, human trafficking, as you could see in the movie clip from Playground, is really the only crime in the world in which the victims of the crime, those who are trafficked and pimped, are made the criminals, in which the prostituted people are criminalized. And Norway and Sweden innovated a solution to that issue, in which they legalized those who were prostituted so that they could go to law enforcement for help or seek social services. And they criminalized the buyers of sex and those who trafficked and pimped others in the sex trade. For many of us, this seems like such an obvious solution. And with those laws, Sweden produced a radical diminishment of human trafficking. Those laws are being considered all over the world today. 4 weeks ago, France passed what is known as the Nordic law system. And Iceland was the third country to pass those laws because of these women who lobbied for 10 years to pass the Nordic law on prostitution and human trafficking. And of course, the Icelandic women celebrated, and the men who were involved, in the way that only Icelanders do, with a champagne toast. And as they were kicking back their champagne, I should have had a champagne glass here, I only have a water glass. As they were kicking back their champagne, the police chief came on national television and said, "Implement this law? This is a joke. First of all, do you think that we have the money or the bandwidth or the resources to end something like prostitution and trafficking? Come on. And besides, prostitution is the oldest profession in the book. We're not going to do anything about that." He said that on national television. We have no intention of implementing these laws. Now, if you ask anybody who has been a trafficked survivor, they will tell you prostitution is not the oldest profession in the book. They'll tell you it's the oldest oppression. And so while many of us would have given up there, the cheeky Icelandic women sitting around their television with their champagne said, "All right, we thought the battle was over after 10 years, but it's just begun. Here we go. And as my friend from Blooming Human says, here we grow." And together over their champagne was born Operation Big Sister. These Icelandic women decided to take matters into their own hands. It began with Gudrun and a young graduate student of hers that worked with her at Stigmat, which is Iceland's Rape and Sexual Violence Crisis Center. And so at Stigmat, They first began by taking out advertisements. Well, actually, Stigmat doesn't get credit, and Gudrun doesn't like to take it either, because really it became a movement of many women. But Gudrun and her young graduate student began by taking out their own ads. As you saw in the film clip Playground, much of this is perpetrated online. So they took out ads online, selling themselves to men for sex. To their shock and awe, they got 500 calls within the first less than a day. And they looked at each other like, what do we do now? So at one point, Gudrun picked up the phone and said, "This is your big sister watching you. Didn't you know it's illegal to buy sex?" News of this cheeky approach spread across what Icelandic women call the jungle telegraph, kitchen table to kitchen table. And women all over Iceland began taking out ads, and when men would call to buy sex, would say, "This is your big sister watching you. Didn't you know what you're doing is illegal and hurting women?" Eventually, they got a little bored with this. There were 85 of them when all was totaled up. Not all of them even knew each other. It became a viral movement. And in fact, I just found out at a screening a week ago of the movie Sold, which I highly recommend, that the Alliance to End Human Trafficking in the Bay Area of California has encountered a group of guys who call themselves that, just a bunch of guys, or JBOG. And they actually do the same thing in California. We're going to talk to them. And they capture phone numbers and names that come in and say, do you know what you're doing here? And it will surprise you that the vast majority of the buyers of sex, 1 in 8 men purchase sex. 1 in 8. All of us know somebody who buys sex. That the vast majority of the purchasers of sex don't have any idea really that they are fueling modern day slavery. And as these just a bunch of guys in California talk to these guys, some of them are doing a bachelor party or a sporting event, or just got bored at one night. Like, they don't realize, and these men say to them, "Do you realize it's a 12-year-old girl that you are buying? You realize what you're doing?" And if they hang up or try to get off the phone, they say, "We've got your phone number now, and we know you've tried to buy sex from a child." So the Icelandic women did this, and they really successfully began to destabilize the sex trade in Iceland, because men didn't know when they were calling to buy sex if they'd get their brother, their sister, their mother, their wife on the phone. But eventually the women got bored, and one of them said to the other, I forget, why are we doing this? Phone call after phone call. "This is your big sister watching you." So the women reminded her, "Don't you remember? We're helping the poor police chief and the police force who don't have enough money or enough employees to fight human trafficking. So we're helping them out." At which point she got a sparkle in her Icelandic eye and said, "Oh yes, that's right. We're helping the police. Well, let's help them a little more." And she started sending her buyers to the police chief's house for services. Because in Iceland, it's such a small country, the population is 300,000, so you can actually look up the president by her first name in the phone book. Iceland, by the way, was the first country to elect a woman president. And it is now the most gender equitable society in the world. And as Gudrun and her sisters will tell you, well, that's a dismal commentary then on the state of the world, because Iceland still has a long way to go. But the big sisters advanced the protection of women on the human trafficking issue dramatically. And they did many, many sting operations of all different sorts. There was a period of time when they sent their callers and buyers to a public square and instructed them to hold a rolled newspaper under their arm. And then they went with their iPhones and stalked them in the square, taking pictures and video. And they called the police and said, there's a suspicious group of men wandering around the square with newspapers under their arms. When the brothels theoretically closed down and reopened their doors as champagne clubs, where for the price of a bottle of champagne, men could buy a 20-minute conversation with a woman from Czech or Yugoslavia who didn't speak Icelandic or English in the back room. And if they wanted to pay for the price of 3 bottles of champagne, they could spend an hour with her instead. Gudrun and her big sisters decided to create their own champagne club, and they invited members of parliament and the mayor of Reykjavik and the police chief. And there, for as much champagne as you could guzzle, you could go into a back room and hear a traffic survivor tell her story, or hear a woman relate facts and figures about human trafficking. Or if you weren't too drunk, the founder of Stigamat, a 90-year-old woman, would teach you knitting, but she didn't want anyone really drunk trying to come to her knitting room because they would injure themselves with the knitting needles. So members of parliament did show up, and after this activism, the 13 champagne clubs that were really brothels were closed down. When the newspaper articles and back pages equivalent in Iceland refused to remove print ads selling sex, even though they were overt, because they said they couldn't discriminate against their advertisers, the Big Sisters took out the image that you see here at the top left. And they also purchased an ad saying, fresh white powder, hot off the boat from Colombia, cheap, call this number. And after that activism, the newspapers and the back pages online stopped publishing ads selling sex. When the Justice building was being remodeled, they were cleaning the marble edifice, the stone edifice. They showed up in costume, wearing maids' uniforms with Windex and sponges, and came into the Justice building, into the Minister of Justice office, and washed off the Bill of Rights on the board and said, we think the interior of this building needs more cleaning than the exterior. We can't share with you, I can't share with you in this little hour and 15-minute webinar all of the sting operations that the Big Sisters engaged in. But we do plan to share this in a Hollywood feature film in development right now through my nonprofit organization, the Fiera Foundation. So humor was one of the foundations of their sting operations, but so was anonymity. The success of the sting was related to the fact that men didn't know when they called if they would get someone they knew on the phone. And in fact, during the Big Sisters operation, there were women who did get a family member calling for sex, and it catalyzed exposure and healing. So once they had acquired over 140 names, phone numbers, and email addresses of buyers of sex, the Big Sisters, through consensus as they had always done, decided to hold a press conference. And the images that you see on your screen now are from their press conference. And there was some debate that went on, how shall we do this press conference? Who should we send, since our anonymity is our power, just as anonymity and under radar is the power of the trafficking trade. So they combated it in the domain where it exists, in the anonymous underworld. And they decided that no one big sister could speak for all the big sisters, that they should all go, and they made these neon burqas that they wore. Now, most of us have never sold ourselves for sex, so we don't understand how that engagement occurs and some of the abusive, frightening things that happen and the things men say or the pictures they send. And many men sent obscene pornographic photos of their body parts to the women when they were selling themselves. So the big sisters made a penis PowerPoint, and they showed it at the press conference. And they also invited all the buyers of sex to the press conference, announcing it as an Icelandic modeling agency where they could meet very interesting women. And so during their penis PowerPoint, they used a laser pointer at the penises on the screen, saying, "Does this belong to anyone here?" They shared audio recordings of their conversations with the men. And what you see here with them outside is their march from the location of their press conference to the police station, where they brought the 140 or so names, email addresses, and phone numbers to the police on camera on the evening news. So what kind of results did this series of operations produce? Was it effective? Well, a week later, after the press conference, the Icelandic government assigned 25 million krona to building a special police task force to stop human trafficking. As I mentioned, the 13 brothels posing as champagne clubs were closed down. The Snow Conference, a multi-million-dollar international child and adult pornography conference that was scheduled to be held in Iceland, billing it as the Bangkok of the North, was blocked at the border. The hotel that was hosting the event closed it down and refused to have them there. And their visas were revoked, so they couldn't gain entry into the country. And multiple buyers of prostitution were arrested and charged. So their sting operation did produce tangible social change. Not to mention a reduction of the demand for bought sex, paid sex. And really, for those of us working to end human trafficking, this is sort of the holy grail of the process. How do we put a chink in the demand? Because in any business, and as you heard the trafficker in the movie clip Playground share, it's to them, it's not about sex, it's about business. And any business is in response to demand. So if we can interrupt the demand for bought sex, then we gain leverage in ending this horrific human rights violation. So, of course, another important result is the conversion of the police chief and the mayor of Reykjavik, who proudly wear "I am responsible" underwear now. So I'm going to let you read this slide while I let my cat out, and I will be right back. Now we won't have cats crying through the whole conversation. So I first met Gudrun on that 10th day at the United Nations, glued to my bench in despair. And she came onto the stage in all of her Viking beauty. Her nickname is the Fat Lady. And said, "Enough. In Iceland, we don't just whine about these things. We do something about it." And so she proceeded to tell us the story of Operation Big Sister. And really in that moment right away, I said, this is a story that needs to be shared with the world. And I approached her at the end to get her business card and asked her if anyone owned her life rights, to which she laughed out loud. They still don't quite believe that we're making a movie about them, although I think it's getting more and more real every day. because they have some best practices embedded in their social activism that makes it effective and sustainable. They never once doubted that average everyday people like you and me can make a difference. They didn't wait for policymakers or law enforcement to do something about what was concerning them. They engaged all those things and partnered with them and enrolled them in seeing their point of view. But they didn't wait. They didn't give their power away. They felt responsible and they took action. And they did it in a way that was fun and inclusive. They included the police chief and the buyers. They didn't, and that generated positive emotion. And the fun of it and the humor of it gave them fuel to keep going and to create non-shaming pattern interrupts that changed the way their society saw the issues they were concerned about. They show us that humor can heal, and it also innovates. And it gives us a kind of tenacity, a staying power. You know, if I'd fought to pass legislation for 10 years, and then the police chief said, even after it passed, well, we're not going to do anything with that new law, I think I would have been stuck in despair in my chair. But their humor and their playfulness and their tenacity said, okay, time to take the next step. They didn't give up. And a big part of that came from celebrating small wins every step of the way. And the Big Sisters and at Stigamont, the Rape and Sexual Violence Crisis Center, they keep a bottle of champagne in their fridge at every moment, because at any moment there could be something to celebrate. And when there is, they do. And of course, their anonymity was a part of their approach. So why does humor work? How amazing that what Interpol and the FBI and the CIA and the RCMP and, you know, the UN and UN peacekeepers and all these major agencies in the world are stumped at trying to stop these Icelandic women from all walks of life, housewives, school teachers, lawyers, you know, counselors, doctors, students. With a little cheeky humor and some solidarity, we're able to really intervene in a powerful way. What is it with humor that has that potency? So there certainly is some significant research that's been done, and these are just some samplings. We know that humor heals individuals. Of course, there's Norman Cousins' famous book about healing his cancer by watching comedy. And Mayo Clinic has this posted even on their website. This is known research. I'll let you read this and decide which one of these things would you like to have. And of course, I'd sort of like them all. For those who are not online, this says humor stimulates many organs. It enhances intake of oxygen, stimulates heart, lungs, muscles, increases endorphins, activates and relieves the stress response, soothes tension and stimulates circulation and muscle relaxation, improves immunity, relieves pain, improves mood and personal satisfaction. And Loma Linda University is doing some very amazing research on humor, led by someone who's a part of the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor. I love this particular study where they were looking at humor and short-term memory. And what they discovered is that, among other things, that those who viewed funny videos had higher improvement in short-term memory than those who just sat in silence. And we know silence actually increases gray matter in the brain. Silence is also good for you. But it turns out humor increases our mental capacities even more. And another significant finding that they had is that it lowered the stress hormone cortisol. And the non-humorous group stress levels also decreased, but not as much. And this now gets into my own area of expertise. I'm a trial by fire person when it comes to the work of ending human trafficking. I think really all of us are. If any of us knew how to end it, it wouldn't be here. But my 20 years of professional life prior to my work in ending human trafficking was in the domain of stress relief and healing. And so I got very interested in the fact that humor lowers the stress response. And when we have a lowered stress response, we have more cortical facilitation, higher brain function, and intuitive intelligence, which we know from heart math comes from the heart, that allows us to innovate the kind of things like the sting operations the Big Sisters created. So I had to interpret all this data through my background as a doctor of Oriental medicine and a stress management counselor and coach with my program Heart Ambassadors. And so that called me to look at the fact that ancient Greek medicine used the term humor in its world of healing. That really health was defined by having your humor in balance, which is very interesting. They used the 4 humors to help them identify sickness: blood, black bile, yellow bile, and, as this slide says, boogers or phlegm. And to be healthy, all 4 of the humors should be balanced in the human body. So humor and healing have a cross parallel in their root language. The word healing coming from the root word hale, which means to make whole. And part of our wholeness, if we look from the ancient medicine perspective, comes from having a balance of all the elements. So in this case, the 5 elements of traditional Chinese medicine are earth, water, fire, metal, and wood. And the 5 elements in the ancient Vedic forms of healing are earth, water, fire, air, and ether. And the fire element, being in both systems, governs both anger and outrage, depression, humor, interestingly, transformation, and vision. And when I unpack the Big Sisters' best practices in transforming the intractable issue of human trafficking, I see that they took their anger, outrage, and depression at this act of violence and brought humor to it as a way of burning it, creating transformation, changing it from one state to another to create a new vision for how we can be together as human beings and relate to one another. So in this moment, I'd like to invite each of you to ponder what it is that outrages, angers, and depresses you. Because we're going to do an exercise applying the Big Sisters' best practice to your own sense of activism. Action is also a function of the fire element, taking action. So when we bring humor to that which enrages, depresses, or angers us, we empower ourselves. Power is also the fire element. To transform the issue in alignment with our better and more productive vision, and we take action toward that. So using some heart math science in a moment, I'd like to walk you through a process that I feel the Big Sisters did not through learned knowledge, but by serendipitous default because of who they are. They tapped into a power we all have, one that we can learn to access. And so one of the things we hope to do in the creation of our Hollywood feature film, a companion documentary about the Big Sisters, and a digital education platform educating people about human trafficking and what they can do about it, is also in that educate people about the Big Sisters' best practices to empower people to follow their passion of activism, whatever it is, whether that relates to human trafficking or not, because each of us has a blueprinted potential and power to take action to make this a better world for all. And the Big Sisters' best practices can serve us in doing that. So now I'd like to introduce some of the heart math science, because of course being a heart math trainer and coach, and that being a key part of my full-time work, as a carpenter looks at anything and everything and sees it as a nail if what they have in their hand is a hammer. I have to interpret everything through heart math. But I think in this case, you'll find that it's valuable that I do. So as you look at these lines, which one of these lines looks like anger and rage or depression to you? And which one of these lines looks like empowered action and vision and genuine care for the issues we care about? Which one looks like stress and which one looks like the release of stress? If you're like most people, you would have tagged the top line as the anger, rage, depression, despair, stress, and the bottom line as stress release, empowerment, action toward a vision. And what it turns out is that these are pictures of heart rhythm patterns. Emotions affect heart rhythms, and heart rhythms affect every other part of our body, including our brain, and which part of our brain is perceiving and responding to life events. So when we're upset, it produces a chaotic or incoherent pattern in the heart's rhythm that actually shuts down higher brain function and inhibits access to intuition. Now we may wonder, is that just like, I don't know, a mechanical error, a structural flaw in the creation of human beings, that when we're upset, our brain shuts down? Let's look at a picture of what that looks like. Let me see if I can get us there. There we go. As you can see, the unhappy baby's forehead is all squished up. That's a technical medical term. Well, this area of the forehead being compressed in that way is happening more than at the surface of the skin, and it's doing far more than just keeping future Botox doctors in business. It turns out that when we are upset, these frontal lobes of the brain seize up and receive less blood flow and less innervation. And it's not a design flaw. It's because our upset is generally assigned to something life-threatening. At least it was when we lived in prairies, plains, deserts, and were fleeing from true predators. And so when we are upset, we lose the higher function of our brain, the part of us responsible for this verbal communication we're having during this webinar, vision and foresight and problem solving and the ability to set a goal and tenaciously move toward a goal and take a clear action to manifest that goal. All those functions of the brain shut down so that we can fight or flee or freeze per the survival need of the situation. The problem is that most of our modern day stressors are not survival based. Or if they are, we actually need our higher intelligence to solve them. Things like global warming or human trafficking. Getting upset about it and shutting down our higher brain function and going into fight, flight, or freeze doesn't help us solve those larger human issues that are jeopardizing us. So for that, we need this wonderful thing called cortical facilitation. As you can see, the happy baby's brain is not being squished. His brow is not furrowed, or her brow. I don't actually know if she's a girl or he's a boy. And that turns out to be something called cortical facilitation. So when the heart rhythm is coherent, which happens when we experience feel-good feelings, feelings that feel good to have, it turns out, and this was the key piece of research that put HeartMath on the map, published in the American Journal of Cardiology in 1995, that when we feel good, our heart rhythm goes into a coherent state that changes over 1,400 physiological events in the body, including opening up the higher brain. So this heart coherent state produced by positive emotion, which we can generate at will, produces an optimal state in which the heart, mind, and emotions are aligned and in sync. The immune, hormonal, and nervous systems function in an energetic state of coordination, like this rowing team. If the rowing team wasn't in sync, they wouldn't get anywhere, and the same is true with our own physiology. But the same is also true with all of our agencies working to end human trafficking. The power to get in sync with each other comes from the heart, as individuals, as organizations, as countries, around an issue like human trafficking or in general. We have a distinction at HeartMath we call balanced care versus overcare. Overcare falls into the incoherent trigger side of the equation. When we are enraged, depressed, anxious, this is what leads to burnout, fatigue, giving up, apathy, and not caring anymore. Overcare leads to no care because we burn through our fuel and we're not getting anywhere. But balanced care empowers us, it renews, it fuels us. And the big sisters used humor to stay in balanced care on the human trafficking issue. And as a result, they didn't fall into the anxious burnout, fatigue, giving up, apathy, and not caring anymore. They empowered powerful vision and action and created transformation in their society that can be a role model for us all. So we've talked about how the higher brain, responsible for fine perception, differentiation of thought and feeling, situation appropriate behavior, self-reflection and self-regulation, self-awareness, problem resolution, and goal satisfaction, comes from this brain that's actually facilitated by coherent heart rhythms and shuts down when we go into an incoherent survival mode. And so learning to activate this coherence at will opens higher cortical function. And HeartMath has a tool, which they sometimes call shift perception or the freeze frame technique, to capitalize on that on purpose. And we're going to do that tool together right now. So most of us know that emotions happen to us by, in reaction, that reactive emotions happen. You step on my toe, I squeal. Ow, that hurts. I might get mad for a minute. That's a reactive emotion. They happen in reaction to life events. And so we spend a lot of time wishing and hoping and manipulating and working to get life to go the way we want so we can feel the way we want to feel. Oh, I want to win the lottery so I can be happy. But what we don't realize when we live our lives that way is that we also create emotion on purpose. And we can create emotions that benefit us and our capacity to benefit the world on purpose, proactively. Just think of the last time you picked up the phone and said to someone that you love, "You won't believe what happened to me today," whether it was positive or negative. Did you relive that experience in that moment? Whether it was positive or negative. So we're going to do an experiment now by reactivating positive feeling through humor, because that's the topic of our day, and apply it to access our own innovation and tenacity and effectiveness. So I'd like you to get a pen and a piece of paper and write down the issue that you brought to mind when I asked you to think of something that enrages you. or depresses you. And I'd like you to take a moment to investigate how that issue affects your body, your emotions, and your thought process, to take stock of how you feel. Do you feel more incoherent or coherent? What happens in your body? What happens to you emotionally and in your thinking? And just stream of consciousness, write those things down. And pick a word or a phrase that summarizes that reactivity and write that down and circle it. And when you're ready, I invite you now to just drop the issue like a hot potato. Let it go for a moment. You put your focus on it now, take your focus off it, and focus your attention instead in the area around your heart. And we're going to do a heart math tool together here called Quick Coherence, which quickly resets the heart rhythm pattern to a coherent state, changing all 1,400 of the biological functions that follow suit, including the way our brain works. So we're going to come back with more clarity, which is also a function in the ancient medicines of the fire element. So if it helps you, you could put your hand on your chest, but I'm going to invite you to focus your attention on the area around your heart, to allow your breath to come in and out while you maintain your focus of attention on the heart area. And you'll want to slow your breath down, perhaps a little slower than you're used to breathing. It can be helpful to count to 5 as you breathe in through the heart area and count to 5 as you breathe out. And as you continue this cycle of breathing in through the heart and out through the heart, I invite you to recall something funny, a time when you laughed. And I'm going to say it needs to be heart-based humor, meaning the laughter wasn't at someone else's expense. It wasn't cruel. It was heart-based. And breathe your appreciation for that humor in through your heart and out through your heart with heart-focused breathing now. And then using common sense, sincerity, and your intuition, ask your heart for a more efficient or effective attitude toward, perception of, or response to the situation that enraged you. And quietly notice or observe any changes. They may be subtle. You may hear a verbal inner guidance, and if you do, write it down, but it may just be a subtle shift in posture or attitude. So I'll repeat that. Quietly observe and sense any change in attitude, perception, or response that would be more efficient and less stressful for you towards this issue you wrote down. And write down the first things that come to you. And observe what's happening now in your body, your emotions, and your thought process. And pick a word or a phrase that summarizes that. And what I'd like to do is come to our group that's gathered here. Yes, yawning is good. Oxygenation. And I'd love to have you just raise your hand if you're willing to share your 2 words. If not, I may just call on those of you that I can see. So let's go first to Jean. Go ahead, Jean.
Okay, the first one was frustration, and then it was curiosity.
Uh-huh. And which one do you think would help you more in... there we go.
The second.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jean. And how about Deborah? You're unmuted. Yeah, not Deborah, yes.
I think I'm off mute. Okay. The first one was interesting enough. It wasn't so much rage as it was real deep grief. And the second one was like wanting to move. And I'm trying to think how one word would be that, but wanting to move and activate, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. I just wanted to move.
Can you guys hear the power in her moving from paralyzed grief into action? Beautiful. Thank you, Deborah.
Sure.
And how about Julie? We'll take one more. You're unmuted already.
Okay, well, I am interested in knowing whether I should be going to this 3-day training I should be going to, and I am what I got was to really listen to my heart for guidance about that.
So you went from uncertainty and doubt into listening.
Yes.
So this simple tool from HeartMath, the freeze frame technique, to me is what the big sisters used without knowing they were using it again and again and again when they would encounter an obstacle, and then bring humor to the moment and uncover a new innovative response together with their collective intelligence that empowered a completely different way to address the issue and became one of the most effective initiatives globally. I mean, what other country besides Norway and Sweden have really effectively interrupted the sex trade? It's astonishing what they pulled off. So coming back to the PowerPoint slide, again, I feel that they used humor to activate that. There's this idea that Einstein used more of his brain than most of us. And science is showing us we can activate the higher and more of our brain with heart coherence. And this heart coherence is not just within us. The heart is an electrical oscillator. Each heart cell is its own battery. So as an electrical oscillator, it produces an electromagnetic field that's measurable even by crude instrumentation, at least 3 feet beyond the body. Most of you know, those of you who've had an EKG done in a hospital setting or a stress test know that once the med tech hooks the electrodes to you, it's not like they then hold your hand during the test. They actually walk away. And the reason is because modern science knows that their heart field could commingle with yours and influence the tracing, the read, the lab test, and they don't want to do that, so they step aside. What that means is that we're sitting inside each other's heart fields all the time. And when we create coherence through positive emotions like, heart-based humor can bring, we have the capacity to actually influence the world around us through the field. And HeartMath did a very specific experiment on this involving 10 groups of 4 people each. So 40 people participated in this experience total. They set up 3 people around a table who knew coherence building practices. And they brought in a 4th person who did not. And that 4th person was simply instructed to sit there or do a couple of different things. And they were incoherent to begin with. And they didn't know what the other people were doing. And the other people were doing heart coherence practices. And what happened within a very short time is the 4th person who didn't know coherence building skills became coherent just in the field of influence of 3 other coherent people. We see this in the Big Sister story around how the police chief transformed in alignment with their presence. And that police chief has since retired, and now the current police chief of Iceland is a woman. And I had the privilege of interviewing her on camera for our documentary at the UN in March. And I asked her about the Big Sisters operation, and she said it was a real eye-opener for us. And that's what each of us as responsible citizens have the capacity to be for our society. So the HeartMath model of change is that our individual coherence in concert with others, like Gudrun and her young graduate student, moving through the jungle telegraph to become a social coherence with their other women in Iceland, then facilitated a ripple effect that produced a globalized coherence throughout the entire country of Iceland. And this becomes a kind of map for those of us in other countries to emulate. Our activism may not be able to look like the Big Sisters did. We live in different places with different issues, although I find it fascinating that the J-Bog dudes are doing this similar kind of operation in California very successfully. When I've had lawyers and law enforcement come up to me and say, well, we could never do that kind of entrapment sting operation here in the United States, and in fact we are. So, but really the inner workings of this, using humor to generate individual and social coherence to create globalized positive social change is really a potential. And again, I would emphasize that it needs to be heart-based humor. And that heart-based humor, which is non-shaming and inclusive, not cruel, heals individuals and can help individuals heal intractable social and global issues. So humor is a universal language. It transcends our differences and unites us in our diversity to make this a better world for all. And so we do have the potential now to end modern day slavery. And I'd like to share with you in closing this video that I just stumbled upon on Facebook last night that moved me so profoundly. It turns out a friend of mine funded this. And I'd like us to imagine as we watch this that this potential for this killer whale becomes a potential for the over 21 million immeasurable slaves in the world. It bears saying that there's no agency in the world that really knows how many trafficked victims there are, because so much of it is underground, and you can hear numbers shoot out in ranges from 3.5 million to over 100 million, and we don't really know. But generally, conservative estimates are over 21 million trafficked victims in the world, more than there ever were in the slave trade of Africans on the horrible slave ships during our slave trade era in the United States, more than perished in the Nazi Holocaust. This is calling us to action. And if you want to take action, by the way, you can go to operationbigsister.com and donate to our efforts to end human trafficking. And I'm going to ask you to visualize, as you see this video unfold, the liberation of not just trafficked animals. This is the story of a trafficked animal, and there is horrific animal trafficking happening in the world as well, but trafficked humans.
Keiko the killer whale, the star of the movie Free Willy, was captured in Iceland when he was 2 years old and ultimately sold to a theme park in Mexico City, where he performed in a pool at 7,000 feet above sea level in artificial seawater. He was underweight and he had a skin disease. Private donors paid to have Keiko moved to a special aquarium in Oregon with real seawater, where he learned to eat fresh fish and where he did not perform for audiences. His health and his skin disease improved. Once Keiko was healthy enough to make the trip to Iceland, he was loaded onto a C-17 cargo plane rented from the US Air Force, who said it was in the best interest of the nation to fly Keiko home to his birthplace. Keiko would be given the opportunity to swim in the ocean again and possibly to be reunited with killer whales. Keiko was placed in his own bay pen, where he could acclimate to his new surroundings, and once clear of his stretcher, he dived, surfaced a minute later, circled the pool, echolocated and vocalized. Keiko was later allowed to swim throughout the entire bay, where he could explore the seafloor and experience a natural environment for the first time since his capture 20 years before. I can only imagine what it must have been like for Keiko to be back in the ocean again, away from cement pools, where he could once again hear the sounds of other whales and to have a taste of freedom to roam where he chooses. Keiko was taught how to exit his enclosed bay and how to follow a boat so that he could be taken on open ocean walks. Each summer, killer whales pass by Iceland on their normal migration route, so the hope was that Keiko might recognize his family or their dialect so that he could rejoin other whales. In the summer of 2002, Keiko swam away with a part of killer whales, and he swam 800 miles toward Norway. When he arrived there 8 weeks later, his caregivers determined he had eaten well and was healthy. Keiko lived more than 5 years in the ocean and had the opportunity to live free once again.
I cannot watch that without crying. I don't know what magic Iceland has for freedom, but may this vision for freedom apply to all being, because our potential as human beings is to see all living creatures not as objects for our exploitation, but as living creatures with their own volition and will. And this is what all of us can add our energy to. Whether you have, money to donate to these initiatives that are liberating trafficked survivors, whether they're human or animal, or you don't, all of us can take a moment right now, as we do in our Heart Ambassador program, which the Operation Big Sister movies have become a project of, and breathe in through the heart and out through the heart and gain a taste of our appreciation for our own freedom, and radiate that freedom to all those who are enslaved, animal and human, so that we become, as Gangaji says, the doorway through which love flows back into the universe. So I'm going to unmute the lines and see if anyone has any questions or anything you'd like to share. This kind of completes the core content. The Keiko video I did not show at the Applied and Therapeutic Humor Conference. I wouldn't have had time, but I also didn't know it existed until last night, and I was so profoundly moved by it. I really wanted to share it with you today. So I'm going to unmute you all. We'll see how that goes with sound. Yes, please, go ahead, Jean.
I didn't see the video about the whale. I heard the soundtrack. Were we supposed to also have a visual?
Yes, you couldn't see it.
I didn't have that, just so you know.
Okay. What I will do when we complete, because it is pretty amazing to see it, I will play it again. I knew we were tempting fate by recording this webinar during Mercury retrograde.
Well, in that case, it was pretty good.
So
yeah, pretty good.
But I will play it again. I realized I was sharing PowerPoint, not my desktop. My apologies for that. So I'll play it again for those who would like to see it. It's powerful to see him. Any other questions?
I appreciate you showing Kiko's, or I heard it as well, and it's a very beautiful, thank goodness, relieving touch for the goal of the project. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, Keiko was a traffic victim.
Yeah.
He was trafficked from Iceland to Mexico. That's exactly, human trafficking originally got its name because that's how traffickers manipulated their victims. They moved them out of their home place where they had access to relationship and resources into places where they weren't legal and didn't speak the language. And now, sadly, the manipulations of human traffickers are such that in this day and age, I think about 95% of traffic victims within the United States are from the United States. It's no longer people, children especially, being trafficked into the U.S. We're homegrown because it's cheaper for the traffickers to do that now and less risky, and they're capable of it. So it's still called human trafficking, although it doesn't always involve trafficking people across state or national borders. It is now, trafficking has come to be synonymous with slavery.
I'd like to say one more thing about Kiko. It's such a relieving and very emotional for me to be able to have this hologram, the feeling of hologramming, that all trafficked beings will one day be free.
Yes.
Sheva, I've just been following the progress of about 30 lions that have just been airlifted to South Africa from circuses in South America. And it's just so beautiful to see that they're able to actually walk on grass and the earth of Africa and rub against trees for the first time in their lives. So thank you so much for including these amazing beings that live on this earth with us.
Margaret, will you send me a link to that and I will share it with the Heart Ambassador group?
Yes, I will.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Sheva, this is Jean. I have to go, but thank you so much for this. Really, really appreciate it. It was well done.
I will also post the Keiko video on my Facebook page for those of you who are Heart Ambassadors, who are Facebook friends of mine. And for those just watching this webinar, I will play it again, so it's recorded. Thank you, Jean, for being here. Much love.
Much love.
Any other questions or comments?
Eva, this is Bonnie, and I just want to thank you profoundly for putting this together, for being who you are in the heart. I have to tell you that this experience that I had this time going through the material at first, the last time that you spoke on it and then going through it this time, I truly felt a transformation, not only through your perspective, but through your incorporation of the tool. And it has given me a lot more hope to be able to take something that I have felt such deep grief about and to take more empowered action. So thank you.
I'm so thrilled. Thank you. The world needs your empowered action. We need your empowered action. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sheva, this is Deborah Norwood from Tennessee.
Deborah. Yes.
I want to thank you very much for this beautiful presentation, and I'm glad I had an opportunity to hear it again. It's resonated the second time even more powerfully than the first time, and I'm very impressed with the changes that have occurred within me just by listening to it. Being a little bit of a left-brained, even though I'm a member of the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor, and I do a lot of therapeutic laughter presentations, I'm still, as an attorney, a bit of a left brain. And so when I first heard the presentation and about the Petri dish of how they did it in Iceland, you know, the part of me kept saying, but in our country, we can't do that, or we can't do that thing, or we couldn't, you know, I could come up with all of the obstacles to this. And it was so wonderful to feel the transformation, to understand that this is not about how they did it as much as how we can change our heart and how we can change our approach, so that those of us who want to do good can do good with advantage and with a lot of good humor. Because I think a lot of us who are do-gooders have a little bit of a martyrdom complex. And this is a wonderful way to transform. I love the way you brought up the fire, you know, the angst and the anger, and change that fire into the you know, the humor that's going to just burn away all of that angst. And I'm very grateful for that insight.
You summarized this so beautifully. I did not script that for her. That was so fabulous. Thank you, Deborah. I really appreciate that. And what good news that lawyers are getting humor. Really. That's freedom. Really such good news that you're here, and thank you. I'm really glad you came. And this recording, of course, will be made available for all of you to share with those that you think would be touched by it or gain some value from it. Any other questions or anything anyone would like to share?
Just you rock, Sheba.
Back at you, Marilyn. If you'd like to learn more about the Heart Ambassador Program, which is a group of people who practice heart math and other personal development skills under my mentorship in order to make this a better world for themselves and for all, and do projects of varying sorts all over the world, like this effort we have to end human trafficking, to make it a more heart-based world for all. You can also write to us you can write to me at Sheva, SHEV like victory A, Sheva at Heart Ambassadors, and that's plural because it takes way more than one of us, Sheva at heartambassadors.com. Or you can also write to our support staff at beinglovesupport at F like fabulous, YERA.com. So without further ado, let's give, Keiko was, by the way, the whale that starred in the movie Free Willy. So let's give Willie the last word. And I will check and make sure that you guys can actually see my screen. Let me see if I can play this again. Can you guys see it now visually?
Yes.
Yes.
Here we go.
Keiko the killer whale, the star of the movie Free Willy, was captured in Iceland when he was 2 years old and ultimately sold to a theme park in Mexico City, where he performed in a pool at 7,000 feet above sea level in artificial seawater. He was underweight and he had a skin disease. Private donors paid to have Keiko moved to a special aquarium in Oregon with real seawater, where he learned to eat fresh fish.
Sorry. So maybe you guys can also manage your own muting by going to the lower left corner of your screen.
And where he did not perform for audiences, his health and his skin disease improved. Once Keiko was healthy enough to make the trip to Iceland, he was loaded onto a C-17 cargo plane rented from the US Air Force, who said it was in the best interest of the nation to fly Keiko home to his birthplace. Keiko would be given the opportunity to swim in the ocean again and possibly to be reunited with killer whales. Keiko was placed in his own bay pen, where he could acclimate to his new surroundings, and once clear of his stretcher, he dived, surfaced a minute later, circled the pool, echolocated and vocalized. Keiko was later allowed to swim throughout the entire bay, where he could explore the seafloor and experience a natural environment for the first time since his capture 20 years before. I can only imagine what it must have been like for Keiko to be back in the ocean again, away from cement pools, where he could once again hear the sounds of other whales and to have a taste of freedom to roam where he chooses. Keiko was taught how to exit his enclosed bay and how to follow a boat so that he could be taken on open ocean walks. Each summer, killer whales pass by Iceland on their normal migration route, so the hope was that Keiko might recognize his family or their dialect so that he could rejoin other whales. In the summer of 2002, Keiko swam away with a part of killer whales, and he swam 800 miles toward Norway. When he arrived there 8 weeks later, his caregivers determined he had eaten well and was healthy. Keiko lived more than 5 years in the ocean and had the opportunity to live free once again.
Thank you all so much. May our time together on this webinar free all being. Much love, everyone.
Hugs all around.
Much love. Thank you, Sheva.